Boom! What's going on, guys? It's Justin Murphy back again. I coach VIP members. This time, guys, I'm here with a friend that I met back in Vegas at the Mastermind event. What's going on, Alex? How are you?
I'm good, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I'm ready for it to quit raining here in Dallas, Texas. I'm so sick of the rain. I like the cold. Like, bring on the cold, but no more rain.
Dude, that's been the most amazing thing about the Denver move, man, has been it's just like you'll get 1 inch of snow and then the next day it's like 70 and sunny and midday you can wear a t-shirt. And so I'm like, this is so different from the dreary, depressing weather of Portland. It's like it's sunny almost every single day. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, no, I'm so jealous. Like as soon as I found out you were moving there, I was just like, but dude, tell us a little bit about yourself. Obviously, Alex is a nutrition coach in the space as well. Does very similar stuff to what we do here with iCoach Nutrition. But how did you get into this crazy online space, and what's kind of your history with, with nutrition and fitness and whatnot?
Yeah, man. So first and foremost, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. Anytime I get the opportunity to like share my story and to share this stuff that I love to talk about, could probably do it for 4 hours, but I know that neither you or I have the time to do that. I love the opportunity to do it. So first and foremost, man, thank you. So I got into nutrition coaching in a much different path than your average person. My entire life grew up and I had different things that were definitely nutrition related. And I recognize that now, but at the time I didn't. I was like a super chubby kid. I never had any confidence. I was, as active as you could be. But the biggest thing was I always had a sweet tooth and I always kind of ate like crap when my parents weren't watching over me. I had some like learning disabilities. So I had trouble reading. I had ADHD, all these different kinds of things. I had the most insatiable sweet tooth. And so in high school, the funny thing was I'm the youngest of three boys. My middle brother was like, Alex, you're going about this all wrong. He goes, you got to take the class at school where it's just nothing but cute girls and you. He's like, get into human development and family sciences. And so, of course, when your older brother advises you a way to find cute girls, you go and you do it. So I got into that class and I did recognize that first and foremost, he was absolutely correct. It was just nothing but cute girls and me. But I actually ended up falling in love with teaching overall. And so what happens after that class is you end up going into the preschool that was inside the high school that I was attending, and you become kind of like a co-teacher. So you start essentially running this preschool. And when I started to do that, I recognized that I just had a kind of talent with the kids. They were attracted to me because it's a really female-dominated field. So to get around a positive male influence in their life, one that they could like roughhouse with and relate to in a different way, was really, really beneficial. And I also saw a lot of people that honestly, I didn't think were doing a very good job. I thought that they were just kind of phoning it in for these kids. And it's like those first 5 years of a kid's development is so vitally important that if you don't maximize that, you're really not doing them any favors. And so that launched me into going into college and getting my degree in human development and family sciences there with a specialization in early childhood education. And so fresh out of college, when I graduated, I went right into my very first teaching gig and I had a classroom and every day it was me and about 11 to 13 kids all on my own. And so I became a teacher right when there was the popularization of like gluten-free, casein-free, kind of like paleo-esque diets. Like people started to really kind of hammer down nutrition and recognize how important it was. And so as you can imagine, like just me with about 11 to 13 kids with all different dietary needs every day, I had to be like really hyper aware of what kids could or couldn't have on a daily basis. And so let's say Jimmy comes in and a well-meaning grandparent is dropping off Jimmy and he's eating a bran muffin and a chocolate milk. And I'm like, he's supposed to be gluten and, dairy free. I could pretty well predict what the rest of our day was going to be like after Jimmy crapped his pants, and it wasn't good. So that all kind of taught me to be really aware of kind of the importance of nutrition. And I could just see how it affected these little humans that I was responsible for. And I'd had all these things that I was never really able to improve. But I'd always eaten like the standard American diet, or I'd do like the Muscle and Fitness magazine diets where I'd do like egg whites and take all the supplements, the legal ones at least. And then like my diet would just be completely madness. But the thing is, I only got fatter and I only got more miserable and nothing ever improved. And so I was like, there's got to be a different way to do this. And so I started to experiment with a bunch of different diets. So it started off with trying veganism, then like vegetarianism. Then I went over and started to play with like a Weston A. Price approach where you do like a lot of like organ meats and like bone broth and everything is cooked in like grass-fed butter and things like that. Then I tried more of like a low carb paleo approach. I started to play around with a lot of different like fasting protocols. And from there, I kind of launched into more of like a very low carb, pretty much keto diet. And around that time, when I started to do jujitsu and Thai boxing, is when I lost a considerable amount of weight. So I lost like 30 or 35 pounds in a short period of time. And people started to ask me questions. I became kind of a natural resource because they saw the results that I was getting. And so at that time, like I knew that this was working, but I didn't really know why. And so I started to dive into like blogs and, you know, any kind of article I could get my hand on and research and books and everything along those lines. And I just kind of got absorbed in it. And so the more that I learned, the more I wanted to share with people and to like really try to help them. And so through this all, in the very beginning, my only approach was like low carb paleo. Like if you couldn't do a low carb paleo diet, you just weren't trying hard enough. Like insulin was the worst thing on the face of planet Earth. And that was, what's up?
You're lying to me.
I know, man. So like the funniest thing was that's where I started. And it was literally just the only tool I had was paleo. And if you couldn't do that, like I would just essentially like not work with people. And the thing is, I realize it now, but I didn't realize it then. I was just bad at my job. I was literally just a crappy nutrition coach is what it came down to. And like facing that sucked, but it also opened my eyes to the fact that there's a whole other set of skills that I didn't really have. And so the biggest changing point for me was I actually got a really nasty staph infection from jiu-jitsu. And so it spread to the inside of my thighs, on both my forearms. And I woke up one day and it covered the side of my face. And I was like, okay, it's probably time to go see a doctor. And so I went to go see the doctor and he's like, yeah, you got impetigo. I was like, what does that mean? He goes, you have a staph infection on your face, Alex. You need antibiotics like last week. So I got oral and topical antibiotics. And throughout this all, like a bunch of the problems that I'd always dealt with regards to like, you know, learning disabilities. I've had like lifelong digestive issues, extreme blood sugar crashes throughout the day. Like sweet tooth that just couldn't be cured. Those all were, for the most part, really improved by like a low carb paleo diet or like a ketogenic diet. The one thing that never improved was my digestion. Just to be completely transparent, dealt with like lifelong constipation. And so when I went on the antibiotics, dude, it just wiped me out. For like 2 weeks straight, I couldn't think straight. I was just totally wrecked by it. My digestion was more off than it had ever been than I could remember in my adult life. And so when I got off the antibiotics and went back to trying to eat a kind of like keto diet, my digestion just got worse. I'd get constipated for like 3 and 4 days. And so that wasn't working. And I was retaining a bunch of water weight that I couldn't drop. I was like 7 or 8 pounds heavier than when I started the antibiotics. And so I thought back to like when my digestion was the best. And it was when I was eating a little bit of a higher carb, kind of lower fat, kind of Whole30-ish diet at the time. And I was like, well, there's something to that. Like my digestion felt the best. That's when I felt the best. I was athletically performing in jiu-jitsu and Thai boxing way better. And so I went back to doing that. And like I started to see some improvements. My digestion got better. I was like way more regular. I had more energy. And that's when I started to track like calories and macronutrients and things like that. And what really led to me doing that was I would go in these Facebook groups and there were a lot of people that were just way smarter than me. And I'd go in there with some things that weren't correct. And they would kind of slap me in the face with science and be like, I'm sorry, dude. Like, I understand that you're in here trying to like help people, but like, you're just factually incorrect. And so recognizing that they were right and checking my ego led me to be like, there's more out here that I need to learn to become a better coach. I don't have the tools in my tool belt that I need to be the best coach possible. And so that's when I changed my stance about like, you know, whatever diet you choose is cool, but like there's principles that we want to achieve, you know, like if you want to lose body fat, we have to figure out a way to make sure that you're in a calorie deficit. Or, you know, if you want to gain, we need to make sure that you're getting enough protein so that you hit that leucine threshold so that we can build muscle mass. And it just made me think in a much more global sense and think about the principles instead of the diets. And so I'll wrap this up here pretty soon. What happened was at the time I was dating a girl and her father was a very, very successful businessman who I looked up to. And we were out in their backyard having a beer one night. And he was like, Alex, you found what you love. You got to figure out a way to kind of make it into a career, get a few letters behind your name. He's like, and then just go work your ass off and you'll be successful. And so I've been through the nutritional therapy practitioner program. After that, right now I'm in Mac Nutrition Uni. And each stepping stone of that has been kind of like over time, just improving more and more in my skill set and realizing that I don't know nearly as much as I thought that I did like 2 weeks ago. And so that's how it all kind of started. Like that was kind of the jumping off point. And then since then, it's just been years of like learning and refining everything. I'm sure you know this better than anybody else, man, but like no two clients are like. Everybody's totally different. So you have to be constantly evolving and getting better at what you do. And so I actually started off only doing in-person nutrition coaching, had like an office and everything like that. And I started to get like super bad anxiety attacks because trying to manage 25 to 30 people coming to your office and people being late or people no-showing and things like that just got too much. So I recognized I could deliver a better service that would help more people if I took everything online. And that's really been probably the last like 6 to 8 months has been doing things strictly online. And it's been an absolute game changer for the amount of impact that I can create, but then also just the way that I'm able to deliver stuff to more people and be able to make myself more widely available. So like if Jane needs to chat on her lunch break instead of after work, like she just needs to call and that's it. So that's kind of my whole story, not as much in a nutshell, but kind of like an overarching view of kind of how I got started in this all.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it's always interesting when like people actually go through the process of like transformation themselves. I always argue like I was like an athlete like my whole life. I never had issues with like gaining weight. I guess the fattest I probably ever was when I was playing college football.
Yeah.
Because that was basically those 2 years, and then the summer were kind of those crazy times that I always talk about.
Yeah.
I was just probably drinking way too much and eating like crap and all that. But and not to mention, I was trying to bulk up to put on a little more weight for football. And so back then in high school, I thought bulking up was eating 5 chicken burritos a day every single day from Taco Bell.
It's not.
Along with spending like $300 at the supplement store, pro hormones and all that, right?
Yeah.
And what it led me to was I reached the target weight, but I also reached a point where I was extremely, basically like fat and slow, like not in any shape to go do football. But yeah, I think it's always interesting when you actually go through. I always argue like the transformation for me was way more, from like a mindset standpoint. Like I had to go through the transformation of like hitting your lowest low to overcoming all of these struggles, but it also correlates over to people that have to like go through a body transformation as well, whether it's mental or physical or both. I think there's a lot of correlations there. So that's awesome. So I'm curious, like going back to the story with trying all of these diets, because a lot of people try all of these different diets, right? And they still just never figure it out. Mm-hmm. So like if you go back to when you were doing kind of more of the low carb and keto approach and your digestion still wasn't that good in comparison to when you were doing a higher carb approach and your digestion was better.
Yeah.
Was there more like vegetable and fruit intake in the higher carb versus the low carb keto? Do you think that's the reason why, or?
I think that it had to do with like denser carbs. So I noticed that my digestion reacts really well to things like, with a last name like McMahon, you can guess that I'm like of Irish coastal descent. So having things like potatoes and oats and sweet potatoes and things along those lines have, for whatever reason, been a real key in helping to move things forward. And I think some of it can come down to some of the indigestible fibers in there. And then also like making sure that like when I do oatmeal, I'll make sure to bump it up with a ton of extra water so it really soaks that up. And for whatever reason, that has been the things that's kept everything moving. I think that on top of that, what happened was, I think that there probably was some like gut dysfunction in terms of like bacteria wise. And so when that all got wiped out, I kind of had the opportunity to like, because I hammered myself with a bunch of probiotics, like as that was happening. And I made sure to take in a ton of extra carbs and things like that, like the denser forms of them, to try to give them the terrain that those probiotics can kind of like cling into and like proliferate in and kind of repopulate with. And I think that there probably was some gut bacteria issues probably going on back then that I didn't recognize or know about at the time. And I think that the higher carbs helped to kind of feed the good ones. But even when I was doing like low carb and keto and stuff like that, I did eat a decent amount of like vegetables all the time. I wasn't one of those keto people that would eat like a brick of butter and like bacon and stuff like that. I still always had a ton of plant matter in there. But it was just one of those things where I think for me, what it came down to was probably I just did it too long beyond when it was useful. And so when I was doing jujitsu, when I was doing Thai boxing and stuff like that, rather than admitting like, hey, I should probably just eat a lot more carbs, sometimes I'd get like kind of lightheaded. I'd feel like shit. My performance wouldn't be very good. Like that kind of top end pop that you want to have if you're doing jujitsu rolling, or if you're doing like Thai boxing and hitting pads. Like sometimes at like 30 minutes into a pad session, I would just like peter out and wouldn't be able to do things. And so I think that probably I had a lot more stress hormone flowing along. And like over time, what you can see is that can actually negatively impact like thyroid and overall digestion and everything along those lines. I didn't get blood work, so I can't 100% say, but I'm guessing that like whenever I have more dense carbs in my diet, I know that my digestion is always better.
Got it. So I guess I'm curious, were you tracking like fiber intake during that time versus the other time? Like, you know what those numbers look like?
No,
I feel like a lot of people that are doing like, the lower carb keto or like, full blown keto, and especially if they're really not eating vegetables and all of that, like that's one of the biggest fixes is just putting those veggies and fruits back into the diet. Or also I'll see with just fiber intake alone, their fiber intake will be like next to nothing on those diets. And then as we move into maybe higher carb, whether it's more vegetables and fruits or more potatoes and rice or whatever, like, or oatmeal, like you mentioned, I think the fiber intake starts to increase up, and that's another reason why. But I don't know. I was just interested if you were tracking fiber during that time.
No, at that point in time, dude, I wasn't tracking honestly anything, but like I hammered a ton of vegetables because one of the things is when I ate a vegan diet, like I knew what made me feel a lot better probably wasn't the exclusion of animal products. In fact, like one of the funny things, it's like, it's funny now, but it wasn't funny back then, was my girlfriend and I were probably about 26 or 27, like 6 months into our dating phase when we both decided to go vegan. And dude, it just killed both of our libidos about 3 months in. Like we went from this phase of not being able to keep our hands off of each other to like pretty much not being interested in sex. And we're like, there's something dramatically wrong here. And once we both started to include more like animal fats, more animal products, everything like that, everything went back to the way that it was. But you later on learn cholesterol is the backbone for sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone and things like that. And so you don't have those precursors, you're not going to be able to make an adequate amount of that hormone in and of itself. And it was weird because it happened with like both of us at the same time. But one of the mainstays from the vegan diet that I just always kept with me because I knew it made me feel dramatically better was just eating a ton of vegetables. So like my snacks midday, because I'd be ravenous, would be like a humongous salad with like pumpkin seeds and like kale and bell peppers and mushrooms and stuff like that. So I know that I was getting a lot of fiber at that point in time, but dude, things just were not moving sometimes. So
yeah, that's interesting. It's so interesting, like everybody, right? Like that's why this whole individualized coaching, there's a reason for it, right? It's not just like a fancy name. Like everybody is different. So when we start to dive into like, one topic we definitely wanted to talk about today was kind of like, the nutrition myths. And I was I popped onto Instagram for like 10 minutes yesterday and was kind of ranting on this a little bit, but like when we're in the year 2018, right? Like what are the biggest nutrition myths that you hear from your clients and in the media and everything else? And I'll kind of add to it as well. But what are some of the kind of the big diets or big nutrition fads that you're seeing?
Yeah. So one of them is people put a lot of emphasis on a specific diet, and they think that the real power of why they're getting results is that diet. And the biggest thing is, I'm not here to say that like that holds no validity. Like if a diet works really well for you as an individual, that is working for you. But what we need to realize is that any specific diet, what it does is it helps you to more easily adhere to a specific principle. So if we're trying to achieve fat loss, maybe a keto diet makes it easier for you to be in a calorie deficit. Fasting works great for some people to be in a calorie deficit. Veganism can work really well. It's less about like the diet, and it's more about being realistic with the actual principle that you're trying to achieve. So what I always tell people is I'm like, if you hate eating a specific way, we need to find another way for you to eat that you actually enjoy, because your ability to adhere to that long term, you may get some short results with something like keto or paleo. If you don't like eating that way, you can force yourself to do it for 30 days. But at the end of that 30 days, your immediate thought process on day 31 is all the junk that you've deprived yourself of. So I'm a much bigger fan of having people kind of create a structure where we work together and we help them to essentially plan in the things that they need to have. And I know that you're a big fan of this too. Like, what's your non-negotiables? What do you need to have that can make this something so that 6 or 12 months from now, you still feel good doing this? And you're like, man, this just doesn't feel as much like a diet. So one of the big things that I talk to people about is that like, there is no one perfect fat loss diet. It's going to be totally different for each people. And I'm sure you see this all the time, but like keto and fasting, everybody who talks to you wants to know what my thoughts are on a keto diet, or if I think fasting is a good idea. And my answer is always, it depends. Like, do you like to eat like that? Do you enjoy fasting? Like, if you're a female and you want to do a bunch of fasting, like, we're probably going to have a talk about some of the negative ramifications that could take place because, well, fasting is something that is an effective method for people. In my personal experience, and I'd like to hear yours too, like, I've seen not a lot of good. I've seen more bad than good come from fasting for women who try to use it as a tool for fat loss.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that most people are in agreement with that. I think the research is in agreement with that. I think there's still some people that maybe do it, but yeah. I mean, it's just up to them, and it's their own personal opinion. And it's that, at the end of the day, like, our bodies are our own like science experiment, right? So it's like, it's no different than the conversation with birth control. Like, you see this all over Instagram these days, right? Like, look, I tell people all the time, my wife and I, she was on birth control for 10 years, and we got her off, and we bought that $300 Daisy, and we did the supplemental protocols and all that stuff. And, it's a blessing. I'm extremely happy, don't get me wrong, but, she's pregnant after being on birth control for 10 years.
Yeah.
So be careful out there, people that want to lose maybe 5 more pounds by getting off birth control. Like, you just have to make sure that you do your due diligence and you like understand exactly what you're getting into. And then I love the question too, that's like, can I do this for the rest of my life? And like, if the answer is no, then it's like, well, what the hell is the point of even doing it then?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the other big ones too, man, is it's like, because people want to fast track everything, they're like, what are the supplements that I should be taking? And this, I'm sure that you probably get this. And I'm like, for 99% of people, I'm like, hey, you're probably not eating enough fatty fish. I don't know you. I can't say that 100%, but like, I'd guess that most people probably aren't eating enough fatty fish. So like, maybe having a fish oil supplement could be helpful. And then vitamin D can be helpful in regards to the fact that like, it's just so difficult to get from dietary sources that's going to be in a large enough amount. For most of us who don't live in like a super, super sunny, like tropical area, like supplementing with vitamin D is probably a pretty good idea. And then beyond that, it's all pretty negotiable. But the big thing is, most supplements are going to sell you a bunch of crap. They're going to have a bunch of claims. And the big thing that is really interesting about supplements is a lot of the times the thing that they're touting is not been shown to be clinically effective. And so number one, they like have a specific ingredient. They're like, oh, this does this. And it's like, you look into the research and you're like, no, it doesn't. It's just flat out, it doesn't. It's not been proven. And then if it does, to like hit that threshold to get the benefit that everybody's looking for, it has to be in that supplement at a clinically effective dose. And the reality is, a lot of those ingredients that are effective, that do work, are also hyper expensive. So to have to put a clinically effective dose inside of a supplement is generally going to be expensive. So what a lot of people do is they hit the minimum threshold that they can include it on the label, and then they claim it as a proprietary blend, which means they don't have to disclose the exact amounts of each ingredient that is in that supplement. And it's just on the label, and they can make the claims. And it's just one of those things where people end up wasting so much money on supplements for things that don't actually give them any real benefit. The real benefit, I think you and I both know, is like getting your nutrition squared away, because you're going to be doing that 3 times a day, and you have to do it anyways. You don't have to take a supplement.
Yeah. Well, and I completely agree. I think it's something where it's like, it's the shiny object syndrome, right? Like, here's the tiny little rocks up here, right? And really what I want to establish is like the big rocks, like that foundation to move us forward. And then, once you establish these things, you want to nerd out more and all that, like, cool, like, be like us, but establish foundation in those big rocks first. So I mean, keto and intermittent fasting are those probably the 2 that you hear the most right now. I know recently, like, the carnivore diet, did you dive into that at all? I know that's one that came up recently.
Yeah, I've known that there's a bunch of things out there, but I mean, one of the most telling things that's interesting is like one of the main advocates of the carnivore diet. When he came out with his blood work, it wasn't good. Like, I think his name is Sean Baker. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast. Like, when he came out with all his testosterone and everything like that, like, was not good. So I just think that the big thing is like, to be so restrictive with your diet that you're missing a bunch of like long-term nutrients, micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, enzymes that you're just not going to get from meat. Like, I think one of the interesting things is we don't necessarily know of a culture that literally only eats meat. When you look at the blue zones, like where people have the largest concentration of people who live to like 100 plus years, and they also have the lowest rates of like preventable diseases, there's common themes among them. They don't all eat the exact same, but there's common themes. And one of the big common themes is they eat a lot of plant matter. They're also very active. And they do have some meat in their diets, but like it's not an all meat carnivore diet. And I think that it's one of those things where kind of got to sit back and see what the long-term ramifications are. Just because something works short-term doesn't always mean it's going to be great for us long-term. Like with me, when I did keto and fasting, like short-term, it was awesome. Long-term, it kind of bit me in the ass, and I had to change my approach as my needs also changed, you know?
Yeah. How long did you do keto for?
So I did really low carb and keto, and then I did like cyclical keto, probably about, I'd say probably like a year, 2 years, something like that.
Yeah, so that's definitely a long enough time. It's not like the people that are like, oh, I did keto for like 3 days. Or I do keto Monday through Friday, but on the weekends I get to enjoy myself. I'm like, you're not doing keto, bro. Like,
yeah. Well, and like you want to get somebody real pissed off, tell them that there's no metabolic advantage. Like that's one of the big claims that they make is like there's a metabolic advantage, and if you eat more fat, you will burn more fat. You're right, you will burn more fat, but unless you're in a calorie deficit, you're burning dietary fat because you've just restricted carbs for such a long period of time that you have shifted your body over to metabolizing, dietary fat and body fat to make ketones. But to lose body fat, you still have to be in a calorie deficit is what it comes down to. Yeah. And that's one of the big things is that they've done studies now. Even one of them was funded by Gary Taubes, where it was a literal metabolic ward study where like every single control that you could have controlled for was there. Like it was a top-notch study. And he outsourced it to a guy named Kevin Hall. And Kevin Hall was a non-biased researcher who wasn't looking to be like, oh, because like Gary Taubes is very openly, like very pro-low carb. But when they did this study that they funded, it didn't actually show that like in obese men, the ketogenic diet had a benefit on like a long-term scale for actual fat loss and like weight reduction over time.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's an argument I always love to present to clients, which is like, let's take the founder of every single, the inventor of every single one of these diets. Let's put them into a room. Let's let them, bitch and argue for 10 minutes at each other about whose diet's best. And then let's ask the question, which is the question that we hear the most often, which is, I want to lose weight, right? And so we're all in this perpetual, state of like wanting to lose weight throughout our whole entire life. So if that's truly the goal is to lose weight, let's write every last diet up on the board. And then let's ask the question, how do I lose weight with any one of these diets? And there's one answer, calorie deficit. And so it all goes back to like, look, like, why do we even have to call it a diet? Like, do whatever you want to do. Let's make sure that we're focusing in on like good quality. We say this all the time. We say, eat good quality food or source good quality food, right? The majority of the time, or in quantities that support your lifestyle, the majority of the time, right? And I think that's just so much easier than saying like, I'm going to diet, because even if that diet works for you, there's still like restriction, and it's just kind of weird. It's like a nutrition dictatorship, and like, I don't know, that's just kind of weird when I'm living here in America and it's not that way. So I don't know. I think the restrictions just cause more issues than anything else, unless you absolutely 100%, have to have a certain type of restriction, which that's a whole other story.
Yeah. And I think that people really like to argue a lot about like, is it calories or is it food quality? And I think that they're having the wrong argument, because it's both. Yeah. Like you can't lose fat without a calorie deficit, but eating really high quality good foods is going to make it a lot easier to stay fuller for longer. You're going to have better energy. Cognitively, everything's going to function better. Like your overall long-term health is going to be largely dependent on the quality of the foods that you're taking in. Now, your fat loss is going to come down to the energy balance equation. So it's not like we have to put a stake in the ground and like argue for one or the other. I'm like, hey, why don't we just take the best of both worlds and be like, hey, like you were just saying, you put it really, really well, Justin, where it's like, eat the right amount that supports your lifestyle and your goals, and have the majority of your foods be these like really high quality foods that we know are going to support your longevity, your disease prevention, and all these kinds of things. And then the other whatever percentage, like 10 to 15, like kick your heels up, have some tequila, have some chips and queso, like enjoy your life. Because in my opinion, I think one of the big things that people get caught up in is nutrition and health starts to take away from their life. It doesn't add to it. It doesn't allow them to live a more enriched life. It makes them obsessive compulsive, and they now start to stress themselves out about every single grain of rice that falls off the food scale, instead of being like, you know what, I'm probably pretty good enough. Like I've gotten to where I want to be. Like I probably don't need to track literally every single thing every single day because I eat like the same foods. So I think that that's one thing for me is like you were saying, like too restrictive becomes a real big problem in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think like summing that up and saying like, look, nutrition, this process should not be the biggest stressor in your life, right? This is supposed to enhance your life, not make it more stressful. Now, anything in life, starting something new, yes, it might be a little stressful just because it's new, but like, let's try to simplify. Like, let's just start with one thing, focus on one thing if needed, or if you feel you can handle more, great. But like, let's get a win this first week, 2 week, 3 week, let's let that win motivate us to then, be able to continue to move forward. So yeah, I love that. So talking about being consistent, I mean, I think that's probably like the biggest missing link for a lot of people. Like we can, anybody can do the for a week or 30 day or 60 day or even 90 days, but like, I really want to see you a year from now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now. So what are your like biggest tips, or what do you feel works best for the clients you work with in terms of creating consistency and long-term adherence?
I think one of the biggest things is that awareness is huge. And I think that a lot of people do not have really great calorie and portion awareness. And so one of my favorite things to do is the person will come to me and they're like, I'm eating 1,300 calories and I'm not losing weight. I'm like, okay, I'm going to 100% believe that you are eating 1,300 calories, but I'd like you to track things for a few weeks. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to do this for the rest of your life, but what I want to do is just see, based on what you think you're eating and what you're actually eating, is there a gap there that we're missing? Is there something that isn't quite adding up overall? And for a lot of people, what it comes down to is once they do that, they come back and they go, you know what? I'm actually just eating a lot more than I thought that I was. And I was like, cool, like no shame, no judgment, no guilt. From there, we have some data to work off of. And I think that that's one of the big things for a lot of people is like the underestimation of food intake. And I mean, people who are trying to be accurate in like, I think it's 3 or 4 different studies, the average that they underreported their calorie intake. And these are people who are trying to be like very accurate with their food intake, underreported by like 40%. That's a lot of calories, man. And if you think that you're eating 1,200, but you're really eating 1,800, that's a whole other ballgame. So I think one of the very first things is just getting people kind of aware around their overall portions and things like that. The way that I explain it to people is if they've been stuck for a long time, I'm like, we can be very anal retentive for 1 to 2 weeks and like really ensure that we're hitting this low hanging fruit, or you can keep banging your head against the wall for another 2 years and not making progress. The choice is kind of yours. Like I'm not here to try to push you one way or the other, but I'm just saying this could potentially be something that really helps you in the long term. And like person after person, it has. And some people do it and they don't want to track anymore, and that's totally fine. But now we have the awareness. We have the idea of like, you know what? I recognize that that's a pretty calorically dense food. I recognize it's really easy for me to overeat this food, even though I think that I'm not. And I think that starts to give people kind of guiding lights right there. So I think that that's the really big thing is like overall awareness. And then from there, I think it's not making it too complicated. I think it's really sexy when people are trying to sell diets where it's like, oh, we're going to do carb cycling, and then we're going to have a fasting day. And then one of these days, it's like, it just gets so overwhelming for people. It's like making it as simple as possible is the best thing to do, so that when you talk to somebody, you're like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you could execute on this like 90% of the time? And if they're anything like a 7 or 8 or above, it's the right thing. And if it's lower than that, you got to figure out a way to kind of unravel it a little bit more to make it something that's simpler for that person. So for a lot of people, like an easy win for most folks is I get them eating enough protein. And obviously you can see me, I'm not a bro, I'm not a bodybuilder, but like one of the biggest things that I see that is dramatically under-eaten by people that negatively affects their ability to like regulate their appetite is just getting protein intake. I'm not talking crazy numbers, like 0.7 to 1 gram per pound for some people. And so doing that fundamentally changes people's appetites. Suddenly they're a lot fuller for longer. Suddenly they don't need all the snacks in between meals. Their cravings are more curbed. They notice their like energy levels and their, blood sugar and everything like that seems more like ironed out and very even throughout the day. And just getting people to do enough of that is a really, really good way to do it. So like for somebody who tracks, like I was saying, right around 0.7 to 1 gram per pound. For somebody who doesn't, like a really easy way to do it is the old precision nutrition, 1 to 2 palms worth of protein at each meal. And for a lot of people, that's a really big step in the right direction because the goal is a calorie deficit, right? Like for the majority of the people I work with, they are after fat loss. I do have a few people that are like weight gain or like Olympic lifters or jiu-jitsu players and things like that. But for the majority of the people, they're after fat loss. So if I can help you to naturally eat fewer calories by just telling you to eat more of a specific food, that's really simple for a lot of people to understand, I think. And then from there, one of the other things is like talking to the person about how they like to eat. I think that that's an important thing is I can't tell you the amount of people who are like, oh, well, I had a coach before and they would just tell me to just eat this. And I was like, did you like eating that way? And like, no, it was fucking miserable. I hated it. I was like, they weren't a good coach. Like, let's talk about what you like to eat and figure out ways to build that in. I know you and I already touched on it, but like non-negotiables. We got to know, like, do you need a date night? Do you need to have ice cream sundaes with your kids? Do you need to have specific things in here that will make this a better long-term play for you? Cool. So we either plug those in for their calories, or I will go in and on the back end, if there's somebody who doesn't track calories, I'll go in on the back end and kind of like rigmarole everything into their plan to be able to be like, okay, this can fit on this day. We're going to, move things around like this to make it work. I think that really, really allows people to kind of let their hair down. For the people who do choose to do more of like a flexible dieting, calorie and macro approach, I think letting them know that like, hey, we're not going to sit here and judge foods. Like if you want a cookie, have a cookie. At the end of the day, if that one cookie prevents you from having 17 of them at the end of the week, like that one cookie for like 3 days is a humongous win. And I think that just letting people know that like, there's nothing wrong with them. They're not broken. There should be zero shame, zero judgment, and zero guilt in their food choices. Dude, just like I've seen people literally just take a deep breath and just go, oh, like you just lifted the weight of the world off of them. Because for so long, what they've been doing is they've been living in this like binge and restrict cycle where they only eat like the good foods for so long and they restrict anything that they enjoy that they go off the deep end on a certain point in time down the road. So just letting them know that. Honestly, like my favorite thing is to hear people say like, yeah, I had that and I didn't feel guilty. Like that makes my day when I hear that from people because I know that they've been yo-yo dieting for so long that like that's a big win from like you and I were talking about from a mindset perspective, but also physically to see that they can have those foods and they're still going to lose body fat. Those are two big ones. For certain people, I do think sometimes fasting can be beneficial, but it's not for everybody. And that's one thing about the approaches that I use is they're not always going to be super stereotypical. Like I will use some stuff that is a little bit far out there for the right person. So like I have a client right now who he lives in New York and he lives a fast lifestyle, man. Like on the weekends, he will go out, he will have a ton of extra calories. And that's just the lifestyle that he's in. I could try to ask him to change his lifestyle, but that's not going to work. So we had to try to figure out something to reduce he would have some days would be like, 4,000 or like 5,000 calories in a day. And so that was obviously hampering his fat loss. So we chatted about like what he's done in the past, what worked, things along those lines. And we decided that doing a once a week, 24-hour fast, we would try it out and see how it worked. And he's been doing phenomenally well in terms of like his overall weight loss. His energy is good. He can still go to kettlebell classes and feel fueled up because we have his fasting in a very specific structure. And like stuff like that can be beneficial for the right person, but it's not always going to be the best fit for everybody. So you just have to make sure like what works well for that person. Other people really like the 16-8 fasting. There's something else that people will use called like if they're going out to eat late at night and they know they're going to have that meal, they'll use what's called a PSMF. So it's like a protein sparing modified fast where up until that they jack up the protein and then have some veg in there to like stay full and to like make sure that they just kind of keep calories intentionally a little bit lower so that later on in the night they can go out, have a big satisfying meal at a social event and enjoy themselves. I think also like low carb and low fat diets are really effective for a lot of people if you enjoy that way of eating, because what you're essentially doing there is you're removing an entire macronutrient. And anytime that you remove an entire macronutrient, you're going to naturally just eat less calories. And so those are kind of some of the ways, like off the top of my head, that I use to try to get people a better adherence in the long term. Just also choosing a meal frequency that people likes. You'd be amazed, like the amount of people that come to me and they're like, I have to eat 6 meals a day. I'm like, okay, cool. Why do you have to eat 6 meals a day? I'm like, well, a trainer I used to work with, I was like, pause. Not to be a dick. I'm not like interrupting them, but I'm like, do you like eating 6 meals a day? And they're like, no, it's miserable. I'm like, cool. How many do you want to eat? Like, I like 2 or 3, maybe a snack. Cool. Let's do that. Suddenly they're just naturally eating less. They're eating more in rhythm with like their actual hunger cues, not force feeding themselves when they're not hungry. And so I think that that's a big thing, man. It's just like getting people more aware, talking to them about the way that they like to eat, not being afraid to do things from time to time to fit the individual. Like I was saying, like the big thing for me early in my career was like having a tool belt that could legitimately help people. So if somebody comes to me, like my client who lives out in New York, and like we could try everything else, dude. We tried a bunch of things and they didn't work very well. Like he would still go out, and those weekends, that is just his lifestyle, and he's uncompromising on that. So I have 2 choices here. I can be like, well, you're not a client of mine anymore. We're done working together. Or I can be like, let's just try something for a few weeks and see how it goes. Lo and behold, the 24-hour fast stuck, and he's doing really well with it. Like he's right along like where we want him to be, honestly, a little bit lower. So like, had I not been willing to step out and try something new with him, we'd still be in the same place. He'd be frustrated. His progress wouldn't be as good as it is. And I wouldn't have kind of another story to talk about with regards to like trying something that other people might be afraid to try with people, but it's proven to be very effective.
Yeah, I think you made a lot of great points across that, which some of them, the one that kind of came to mind here immediately was that nutritional tool belt. And yeah. I think for us as a coach, like having a nutritional tool belt, obviously, but I think as a client, right, and creating that nutritional tool belt for them and helping them to understand like all of these different things. Like when we first start off, like what you said with understanding food quantity, right? You need to know how to weigh, measure, and log your food correctly. Like even if you just do it for 1 week or 2 weeks or whatever, you need to be able to learn that tool. You need to go to MyFitnessPal University so that you can graduate with that tool in your tool belt, right? And then from there, we'll move on to the next thing. And we're going to keep, like, once the tool belt's full, you've reached your goal, you feel 100% confident in being able to do whatever you want for the rest of your life because you've been educated and equipped with all the tools you need. Like, go, little guy, go, like, I'm so proud of you. And that's graduating, right? So I love that. I think that's a big piece for people just to think about, like, what does my nutritional tool belt look like right now? How many tools do I have in my tool belt? And how can I start to educate myself on equipping myself with these tools?
Yeah. And so I think that like one thing you hit on is like, it even goes perfectly with the name of your guys' nutrition coaching company, like iCoach. Like it has to be individualized. It has to be that per person, I think that we've all in our mastermind, and like you and I have spoken about it, like why we don't like things that are templated and that are cookie cutter is because a one size fits all doesn't really fit anybody. And that's the problem. Like if people are paying you to have a personalized nutrition plan or to have you like be able to kind of jerry rig their nutrition to be able to make it work specifically for them, it might not be perfect, but it might be what they need at the moment. Like that's not individualization. So then you're already the people who are like, oh, this is totally customized. You look at it, you're like, that's funny. That husband and wife just got the exact same nutrition plan, which is a true story I've heard from like multiple people. Like, yeah, we hired this nutrition coach and he gave me, who's a 195-pound guy, the exact same quantity of like food as my 155-pound wife who's not as active as me. Like that's bullshit. That's not coaching. That's not helping people. Yeah. That's you're literally just trying to make a money grab, and you're trying to keep people at an arm's length from the true answer to their question to be able to just sell them more. And I don't like that. That's one of the things about the industry that kind of bugs me a little bit is I feel like people aren't being really honest about the principles behind things, because if you give somebody the principle, the resale value on that isn't very good, right? Like that's the reason why you and I have jobs is we give people the principle. We're like, hey, you might not know how to action this perfectly in your life, but I'm going to teach you how to do it. So that at some point in time, like those people are going to be stark raving fans because they're like Alex and Justin, like they taught me everything that I needed to know when I was good to go. They sent me off on my way. They didn't try to string me along and like bleed me for like a course or like all this other shit that they don't need, because in the very beginning we're like, hey, this is what you're after is a calorie deficit. And you can do that with any diet. I'm going to teach you how to do it better. But at some point in time, you're going to know how to do this on your own and you're not going to need me anymore. Like, I just think that there's something honest and like very cool about that I think a big part of the industry is honestly missing.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And I tell I tell people all the time. I'm like, look, regardless of the price that you just heard, I want you to think back to all the money that you've spent up to this point on whatever, right? And then ask yourself the question: if I took all that money and I invested it for the last time and made this the last nutrition coach, the last nutrition program that I invested in, like, wouldn't that all be worth it? It's almost like when you think back to going to school, right? When we first get out of high school, we look at, we're like 4, 6, 8, 12 years, whatever. Oh my God, that's going to be the rest of my life. But then you get done with it and you're like, oh, that was such a short time out of the big grand scheme of things.
Yeah. I think that honestly, one of the things that's really interesting about that too is the fact that like when you have people think about it, to get them to understand that time is your greatest asset. Time is the one thing that like when that clock hits zero, unless Elon Musk helps us out, like we're all done. You know, when that clock hits zero, we're all going 6 feet under, dude. And so to help people realize to wake up every day and to feel unconfident, to feel not comfortable in your own skin, to be agonizing over the fact that you look in the mirror and you're not happy with what you see, or you sling insults at yourself, or that you have like a closet that has 2 different sides, one that you can fit into when you're dieting and one that you can't. Like, think about what it's worth to you to remove all of those and to now replace that with self-confidence, to be able to replace that with, being up front and center in the pictures with your family and smiling, to sit down and eat meals with them and to not ever really have to think like, is this going to make me gain body fat? To just know that that's a part of everything and you don't have to worry about those anymore. I think that when you get people to understand the value behind that and how you can help them do all that in like a fraction of the time they'd be able to do it on their own, if they are able to do it on their own at all, that's the game changers, to help people realize that like time is the greatest value. And if you can get somebody that's going to help you speed up that time and kind of like collapse it or shortchange it for you, then that's really the most valuable investment that you can make. Yeah,
absolutely. I love that. I think that's a good, a great note to end on there. I love that. I think that's and it's, as you and I both know, I mean, we both have the same exact like mentor, and we've made it that investment in ourselves from like a business standpoint. And I even have one of, Ellen, who's on staff with us, she's my nutrition coach, and a lot of it's just to hold me accountable, really. But I'm a big believer in like coaches need coaches, and really just everybody could use a good coach in their life, for, regardless of what avenue you want to go with it. So I love it, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for taking the time today. And dude, where can everybody find you at? Where's all the social media handles and loving for you?
Alrighty, man. So I do most of my posting probably on Instagram. So you can find me at Alex _McMahon, MCMAHON _NTP. So N as in Nancy, T as in Tom, P as in Peter. And then you can find me on Twitter at EvolveNTPDX. And then Facebook is just Evolve Nutritional Therapy. And my website is Evolve Nutritional Therapy. Do like a weekly blog on there and stuff like that. So if you look up Evolve Nutritional Therapy, you will just find me pretty much anywhere there is to find people on social medias.
I love it, dude. Awesome, man. Well, let me sign us off here, and then we'll chat.
All right, brother.